Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues brings expert guests to the airwaves to talk through your divorce questions and fill in the gray areas about separating. From thinking about divorce to how to behave during divorce to what to do after, this is Divorce Dialogue. Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and a trainer at the Center for Understanding in Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And I'm excited to welcome Avi Kahan to the show today. Avi is a distinguished mediator who specializes in integrating halakhic principles with civil law in divorce proceedings, and we're definitely going to talk about what that means. Avi has a deep background in finance and law and expertly navigates the complex intersections of money, ethics, and family dynamics, ensuring fair and compassionate resolutions for all parties involved in the divorce. Welcome, Avi Kahan, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Now, let's start a little bit with talking about mediation. Maybe you could start by explaining the role of mediation in divorce proceedings as you see it and how you think that it differs from traditional litigation or maybe even traditional negotiation.
That's a very loaded question, and I'm going to try to answer, like usual, with some controversy. So be prepared. There's mediation, and then there's what it's supposed to be. And then there's what it is. What mediation is generally is when two people are ready to come to some sort of agreement. And for whatever reason, a third party person, be it a note taker, a facilitator, a helper, an advisor, is able to help them get to that final agreement. I would say 90% of mediators are just people who know the divorce system. So, most people don't even know how to calculate child support or alimony, and a mediator does. So the mediator is like a conductor to an orchestra of a concert, and it's orchestrating the conversation and allowing it to flow. That's what 90% of mediation is. I don't look at that as mediation at all, but that's what it's being practiced. Real mediation is understanding the conflict and trying to create a third solution that you think both parties are going to accept. That's real mediation, not like, okay, you want Sunday, you want Monday, you want Tuesday. Oh, I'm such a great mediator. I scheduled the week. There was never a conflict to begin with. Real conflict, like a non-solutionable conflict that the only answer is not you're right or you're going to give in. It's to create a third solution that the parties will accept and that they'll almost feel that was their own solution. That's what real mediation is, but that's only like 10% of what I see happening.
When you say it's only 10% of what you see happening, you mean in the world of mediation, only 10% of mediators are operating that way? Is that what you mean?
Only 10% of mediators and 10% of the time. So an average mediator is mediating cases that they did an intake and a screening and they saw that it's mediatable, if that's a real word. That I could mediate. Oh, I think I can mediate this case, right? I think they have a screening and some type of system and the case goes through and they're like, okay, the couples are willing to listen to our rules. Mediation conferences are structured about telling mediators how to take clients that will work through mediation. It's like, no, that's not mediation. Mediation is taking something that doesn't work and seeing if you can mediate it. That's
Okay.
mediation.
All right. So what you're saying is that a lot of mediation, for better or for worse, no judgment really here, doesn't require that much of the mediator because there's knowledge of what needs to be discussed, knowledge of the ways in which the law might apply and what other kinds of things people do help them resolve, brainstorm particular ways of handling it. But that what you're talking about, and I'm putting air quotes around this for our listeners, real mediation. I think what you're saying is that when the conflict is really intense and the conflict dynamic is really difficult and it feels really stuck, that's when mediation skills really can help people because it's getting
Yes,
through what seems to be an unsolvable problem with the mediative techniques. Is that correct?
yes, but a little bit different. There is a form of mediation of what you just described, and there's a huge expertise that you need in how to get somebody who's stuck unstuck. That's still not what I think mediation is. That's beautiful. It needs to be done. It needs to be done. You need to figure out how to harmonize the conversations and validate people's opinion. And when you go to mediation courses, they spend 100% of the time on this. How do you talk and how do you communicate and how do you reflect and how do you have a conversation to unstuck people? That's nice. That's amazing and it's needed. And 90% of the cases probably could just settle with that. But real mediation is when there's an issue, not because people are psychologically stuck and you could use a tactic to be able to allow them to communicate. When there's a real issue over here that's unsolvable almost, right? Mom needs $1,000 a month. Dad is making 800. How do we mediate that without making a ruling? Litigation, people think litigation are like, oh, when we can't figure out an answer. It's like, no, you're a couple. You were one time married. Who else should figure out the answer but you guys? Let me help you figure out an answer together that you're all comfortable with. Not by ruling, not by arbitrating, not by telling you and forcing you, but by coming up with a solution. 90% of mediation is the unstuck techniques, which I'm not diminishing, like you said, I'm not judging. I think that's beautiful. But if you ask me what mediation is, 90% is what you described, learning how to have a conversation with people, which is so important. But what real mediation, which I don't see so much of expertise in, is how do you take a real conflict and come up with a solution without forcing people to accept your opinion?
All right. How do you?
I didn't say I'm the 10%. I'm from the 90%. I don't know. I don't know if I'm capable of all solutions. I could tell you there's some huge debates going on in the world that people haven't figured out how to mediate, right? There's huge wars and the solutions are like killing and terrorism and fighting and destruction and genocides that are going on and nobody figured out how to mediate. I wish they would even go to arbitrate that issue, but do I think that issue is mediatable? Yeah, you need somebody to come to the table and say, okay, we have a contradiction, we have a conflict, a real contradiction, not a fake contradiction, not one that I can convince you is not a contradiction, a real stalemate. And how do we break our heads to come up with a solution? And part of it is poking at everybody's agendas a little bit and doing the regular mediation techniques and figuring out and saying, hey, are you genuine? Is this really what you want? Part of it is doing that, but there's going to come a time that there's going to be something that's stuck and you're going to have to come up with a solution. And you could say, oh, we're going to arbitration or we're going to court. Or you could say, no, we're still going to mediation and we're going to go to a third party person who's going to help us come up with an answer like we were married. When you're married and you're stuck, you figure out answers, right? It's like, well, we don't have money for the kids. We're stuck. Let's figure something. It's not like, oh, let's go to someone else to figure out that this is not an issue. It's like, no, let's come up with a solution. And I think divorce requires that.
Yeah. Well, just to go back to what you were saying before, not all conflicts do the parties to that conflict want resolved. So, like, just comparing divorce to a international conflict, and I don't want to get too deep into that because that's a whole different conversation. It's not the topic of divorce dialogues, that's for sure.
Well,
But
if you
in
if
divorce,
you go back enough, you'll see that what started the conflict was a divorce. If you go back through
of,
history,
of course, yes,
years, it
of
was a
course.
divorce.
And so then the question, I think that the question, and divorce is a really interesting conflict, right? Because it's not like a conflict with your boss or a disagreement about whether or not to buy a car for this much or that much, or sell a house or buy a house. Like these kinds of negotiations could be walked away from, but you cannot walk away from the divorce negotiation.
Let
So
me
in
ask you
some
why. Why
ways,
is divorce a conflict in your opinion? Why does divorce have to mean conflict?
I think that it doesn't have to, but it usually does.
So
And the
why?
reason is there is a reason that the people decided to get divorced. Now, sometimes that reason is change in lifestyle. They've raised children. One of them wants to retire to Florida and the other one wants to travel the world. And they just say, listen, you do you, I'm going to do me. We can be friends here, but we move on to a different stage in our lives, in which case the conflict is a lot less, right? But usually there is a sense of unresolved conflict that leads to the divorce. And whatever the reason is, I have my own theories about it. I think usually that unresolved conflict results from some breakdown in communication, some inability to communicate effectively, especially when people disagree, and that over time, because it's not like they have one fight and the next day, boom, they're like, oh, let's get divorced, right? That would be easy. Right? Like that, but that often years and years and years pass while they have the same conflict or have the same breakdown in the conflict relationship, like, don't call it conflict, call it negotiation, where they misunderstand where they're coming from. And we're negotiating all day long, all of us, all the time. Like, it's just the way that people interact. Let's go for Chinese. No, let's have Italian. How about 10? No, how about 11:30? Like, this is all a negotiation, right? And so just in the ways that we're leading our lives. So I think that, and then there becomes this sort of idea that the other person is out to get you, or the other person is just wrong, 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 and I am right, right, right. So we get into a false, like a false idea of right, wrong, versus good intent, bad intent, and each of us sees this, and it just leads to, and I'm going to say it again, conflict, and that conflict challenging to unwind. In some places, it's not that challenging to unwind. When both people want what's best for the kids, even if they can't agree on what that is, but at least they have the same idea. But Avi Khan, just to get to the point of this idea of unwinding that conflict to a place where, and I think what you're saying is there is an external problem these people face. One person needs $1,000 a week. The other person only can give 800. What are we going to do about that problem? That's an external problem. And if the people can get on the same page about solving that problem, then they're much more likely to be able to do it. And so I think what you're saying in the real mediation, just put air quotes around that again, is that they have a conflict dynamic. They are also facing a real problem. And that sort of triangular cycle of real problem and conflict dynamic gets to a place where somebody who's a really skilled and experienced mediator can intervene in a way to open up the world of possibilities to a place where it's solvable from a place where it isn't solvable because they're just kind of going around circling the drain.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you believe that the reason why divorce looks the way it looks is because the people who are getting divorced for a reason. And that reason is still going to exist throughout their divorce. They're getting divorced because they couldn't communicate well, and like you fully articulated. And now, why do you expect better from them as they're getting divorced if they couldn't figure it out while they were married? I've been hearing that for a couple of years, but it doesn't answer to me how come. See, divorce is the only topic that what people want government to think about divorce is never what they're thinking about. That means government institutions are always behind people in divorce. As divorce gets more accepted, government follows. So in New York, only in the 90s, they made no fault divorce, that a lady's allowed to get divorced without getting permission. It took a lot of time. From the 60s, women were demanding it. It takes government always behind, and there's books, literature written on that. Shepard Kitchen, who wrote a history of divorce from the beginning of when divorce was disallowed by the Christian church until modern times, wrote that you see the pattern of humanity, and that bothered me tremendously. And I don't believe that's the reason why divorce looks the way it looks. I validate it. People tell me, well, look, what do you expect from them? They couldn't communicate as a married couple. How do you expect them to communicate as a divorced couple? I think that people believe that a divorce is a sin. They believe there's an evil behind divorce. They believe like someone must have done someone wrong, even themselves. People who get divorced think they did something wrong. Like, was I destined? Was this destined to happen? What do you mean? I learned as a girl about destiny, that you fall in love, soulmates. And that just gaslights the brain so badly that people don't know how to now even navigate the conflict. Like, I know what I'm supposed to I know how I'm supposed to negotiate with somebody who I love, right? I'm not going to destroy them in the argument because then they're not going to love me. Imagine my wife says, "What do you want for dinner?" And I go and I debate like I'm closing $1 million deal, right? Like, dinner's not going to be fun no matter what, even if I got the restaurant that I want. So marriage, we know the rules, but in divorce, it's like, well, we sinned. You're doing something wrong. You're the betrayal. I'm the betrayed person. Who cares who it is? There's evil here. This whole thing is war. It's fear to do evil, disgusting things to someone in divorce. You're allowed to go to court and try to take away the kids from your spouse, and they won't look at you as an evil person for doing that. Nobody. It's like, I had to fight for custody. What? You went to a judge who is elected to ask them what to do about your children? Are you out of your mind? You're going to a third-party mediator to discuss custody? You have to be sick to do that, but we do that. The whole world does that because people are like, well, divorce is so disgusting anyways. We might as well act out disgusting. I believe if we could paint divorce as a blessing and not as a sin, how we do that's another conversation. But if we could paint divorce as like you were married to this person and you're never going to forget them. The brain is not capable of forgetting. There is no science that the brain could forget memories. And therefore, the next time you're going to pick up a glass of juice that you one time had with that person, your brain is going to remember that person. So you're never really getting divorced. Fathers and mothers can't get divorced as much as they try. It just doesn't exist. Divorce is between a husband and wife. Remember, now you're just going to be a father and mother together, and you're not going to be a husband and wife. And it's a different relationship. As a husband and wife, you're allowed to fight. As a father and mother, you're not allowed to fight. Only husbands and wives can fight. It's like, let's improve our relationship by getting divorced. I think if that can happen, the mediators will all of a sudden see couples very differently. And
All right, let me just remind people that I'm Catherine Miller, and you're listening to Divorce Dialogues, a podcast dedicated to educating people about divorce-related topics so everyone can divorce with dignity. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be sure that you don't miss an episode. And I'm talking today with Avi Kahan about mediation and divorce, and what does it mean? And Avi, I agree that divorce is a transition. Like it's a reforming of the relationship. It is not an ending. And so I mean, it could sometimes be if you don't have kids. You've been married a couple of years, you don't have kids or whatever. You're never going to not have been married to that person, but it doesn't have that same ongoing relationship so that you're not going to be thinking about it as much as you are if you do have children going forward. But for most people who are getting divorced, I can't remember who said it, but it's a well-known psychologist has written that you can never actually divorce somebody. I mean, you're like obviously legally divorced. You may be remarried and repartnered and all of that sort of stuff, but that family relationship is still there. And I think what you're saying
pay
is
attention to the
that,
way you just said it. You made it sound like you're legally not married anymore. Like maybe does divorce nullify the marriage? It's not an annulment. It's an addition to
no, it just makes it just ends the marriage. It
No,
doesn't.
it doesn't. It just starts a divorce. How can you end the marriage? You don't have an annulment. You don't have
I'm saying legally,
no,
legally.
legally the marriage never ends. You just get divorced. It's a new agreement called divorce. It's like a postnup.
You're
A
no
postnup
longer
doesn't change.
married to that person legally.
What does that mean you're no longer married? Before the government was involved, let's make believe no government involved. It was still
Yeah,
divorce, right? It was still
right.
divorce.
The legally thing is only about the government. It's about how society views that basically economic partnership. That's
The
all that it,
divorce existed before the United States existed, right? Before
of course.
1760 it was divorce. And divorce in those cases, what did it mean when you gave a divorce? In religious communities, what does it mean? It doesn't mean an end, it means a new beginning. I wish I would be able to, like, it took me years to try to understand that myself, that the world is looking at divorce. That means the Christians don't allow divorce because it ends a marriage. Who said it ends a marriage? There's nowhere in the Old Testament that it ends a marriage. It's a New Testament idea. And that's why it's forbidden, because you're not allowed to end a marriage. You don't end marriages. Like you said, fathers and mothers can't get divorced, and memories can't get divorced. And even if you don't have children, imagine you built an organization together. You can't get divorced anymore. You did an idea in life together. You can't divorce it. You could add a new idea, and that new idea is called divorce. It's not ending a marriage, it's a new commitment. A new commitment to treat the other person as better than, look, you get divorced to make life better, not worse, right?
100%.
So to the public, it's not like that. You get divorced, people start making it worse. They go spend millions of dollars in court and they go fight. But divorce is supposed to make your life better. So it's a positive thing, not a negative thing. It's like, I was married, now I'm even better. I'm divorced. Now, nobody wants to get divorced. I don't mean like I'm married, happily married to my wife. I don't want to get divorced from her. But I use divorce as a catalyst to help me behave. That my wife should know that this controls me. Our marriage controls me, and her walking away and me walking away control each other to behave to a certain way, because we know that we could still have children walking away from each other. And if the environment at home is going to get too toxic that we can't stay together, we'll shake each other's hands and we'll say, hey, I love you, but it's not working out together. Could we get along separately? Well, what's that called, getting along separately? That is called divorce. It's a greater relationship than marriage. Because marriage, you live in the same house, and divorce, your father and mother in different houses. It's a that's why you don't have marriage agreements and you have divorce agreements.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is that if people saw divorce as a new beginning rather than an end and weren't ashamed of it, right? And whether or not they're aware of the shame or not aware of the shame, that societal, religious, cultural stuff like load is there, and that if people saw it this way as something that's going to lead them to something better, that then the whole approach to divorce, their own individual approach and the cultural approach to divorce would be shifted.
Yeah, no one in society would allow you to hire a lawyer to take away the kids from a parent. I mean, I think this sounds like Nazi Germany. To go to court in America in 2025 and litigate about taking away kids from people and they're not healthy. They might have issues. Let's say you found an issue, you gaslit them enough. In where I live in Rockland, there are 5 nice, amazing women who are between the ages of 40 and 60 who don't have their children. The judge took it away. Like, how do we allow that? When people kidnap kids, we go crazy. When they traffic kids, and from normal, healthy people who are growing up in America, you could lose your kids if you go through a divorce. And it's normal to hire an attorney to do it. And I don't know how that became allowed in society. It only could have been because people say, well, you're anyways doing something so guilty and so wrong. So when you're doing something wrong, I could combat it with evil also. And that's why divorce became toxic. I'm talking about, you ever went into a courthouse and saw a cafeteria or a snack machine? Not in my courthouse. No one has an appetite there. It's not a good business. Like, there's no restaurants around the courthouse. You would think all the lawyers are hanging out there. Everyone's going out to eat after court, right? Like, no, it's the most disgusting. And I love the judges and I love the lawyers and I'm friends with all of them. I mediate for a business. But it's horrific of what became to humanity for thousands of years since we said that divorce is evil. You know, one of the difference between Judaism and Christianity, the main difference is divorce. In Judaism, it's celebrated as a positive commandment. You actually do a congratulations when people get divorced. And in Christianity, it's one of the biggest sins, if not the biggest. And one of the cool things is about Judaism that Moses, who was the Messiah for the Jews, the first Messiah, he was born from parents who got divorced and got back together. They got divorced. Think about it. Think about getting back together after you get divorced. You know how healthy your divorce has to be to get back together?
Yes.
That is the most beautiful romantic thing in the world. They got divorced. It could have not been a nice divorce. It means they got divorced. These were great leaders in Egypt during slavery time. And they got divorced because they had a political debate, political falling. Some people liked the Pharaoh and some people didn't like the Pharaoh. Some people thought he was good for the Jews. Some people thought he wasn't. And they got divorced and their daughter got them back together. And that's when Moses was born. And then, and that's when they had to hide him and they put him into Pharaoh's house to grow up as an Egyptian. Think about that. That's like, for me, that's such a deep message. I tell people, get divorced in a way that you could get back together. You don't have to get back together. I don't want you to get back together. You guys are toxic together, but get divorced in a way that you could get back together.
It's pretty amazing. So that sounds like in that situation, if people are getting divorced, not because they don't like each other, but because they have really different political views, right? And I could see that happening in this country.
It's an example. You only get divorced when you can't live in the same house. That means their political views hit a level that they can't live in the same house together, but they still got divorced. They went to a mediator who sat there and said, guys, let's make life better. You guys didn't get along. You have to get divorced. You can't live in the same house. No problem. Let's figure out solutions, not because you guys want to kill each other. Let's figure out solutions because this is the father of your kids and this is the mother of your kids. And if you really care about your kids, if you really care about yourself, if you believe in soulmates, then when you're going to die, you're going to go back together to this person. It's going to be very embarrassing if you didn't get along for the last 50 years to go back together. I tell people, you know what hell is? Hell is getting back together with your spouse. It's like if you acted like a nutcase for 70 years in court and fought and toxic, and you can't go to the children's wedding because of that, and your children's life are known as divorced children, and that's the majority. That's 90% of the cases. If you ask me if I was ever successful in doing what I'm preaching, the answer is no. I wasn't successful in it, but I believe in it.
So Avi Khan, we have someone listening to the show, that person is in the middle of the divorce or thinking about divorce. And so what is the impact of what you're saying? How should the listener respond? And what should they do based on the principles that you're discussing?
So what I've shared with you is basically my speech to everybody. I mean, their examples are different. Sometimes it's a custody question, financial question. My narrative is always in my head that you're still married and divorce doesn't mean it. And I try to use that as my philosophy to de-escalate things. If someone's not willing to hear it, they get triggered and they could be so upset at me. I've had people who wrote articles online about me because of this. But if someone's ready to hear it, it's a transformation. It's a transformation. I've had people who wanted to fight over custody, were convincing themselves that it's the best for their kids. And when I walk them through how they're still married to their spouse, you don't get divorced. You don't get divorced from your spouse. It doesn't exist. It's a made-up word. You commit to a new relationship with them. And that relationship has been called in the secular world as divorced. It's not a biblical word, right? It's a commitment. It says if you don't get along with your wife, you should commit her and write her a document, and that will be your bill of separation. It's like a prenup, a postnup. You write agreements. People write agreements, partnership resolution with splitting the company in half. That's it you're doing. And it's going to be an opportunity to create love and not create hatred. It sometimes helps de-escalate certain issues. Would I be, if I was going through a divorce, would I be able to be conscious of this idea? I hope so. I hope I manipulated myself that this idea is true enough that I'll actually listen to it, but I can't know because I never went through a divorce. But I beg people to listen to this and say, stop, just stop fighting. I haven't seen one thing. You cannot bring me a mediator or a litigator that will tell me, no, he's wrong. Fighting is good. I've seen the kids blossom from it, right? Killing each other is no. And so I know I'm right in that aspect. Not one judge ever told me, stop what you're doing. Stop it. Every judge tells me I'm sending you a case. Try to get it out of court. The judges are horrified about what they see. I have friends who are popular judges, and I speak to them because it's more emotional conversations. Like we just talk about what's going on in the world because their job is to make sure the community is being taken care of as a judge. They're elected officials. Make sure that parents are seeing their kids. Make sure people have enough money to live. They have laws in best interest of children. Make sure financial agreements are being kept to, and they're horrified what goes on in court. And lawyers, I have lawyers who are very good friends of mine. One of my closest friends is a lawyer by the name of James Sexton. I don't know if you know who he is from New York.
Sure.
A very good friend. I live here in Rockland. I live near him. I know him for years. Sometimes we're involved in cases together. Sometimes we just chat. We did podcasts together sometimes, right? He tells me he's like, if someone needs me to be a weapon, I'm a weapon, point me somewhere. Right. And when I hear that, I smile and I laugh because he's a great guy. And sometimes people hire him to litigate. But does it make sense to me? It makes no sense to me. Do people need to be protected? Of course, when someone's killing each other, you have to. I send people to lawyers when they need to be protected. And I begged them, I said, don't use this to hurt your spouse, protect yourself. But lawyers don't know the difference, But it's a dream of mine. It's a messianic dream of mine that one day the world is going to change and one day people are going to get divorced beautifully. I think it's the last thing humanity needs to fix the world is conflict resolution.
You're listening to the Divorce Dialogues podcast, and I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues has been educating people about divorce and relationship issues for over 10 years. Subscribe to the podcast to be sure that you don't miss an episode, and check out our previous episodes on the podcast website, divorcedialogues.com. And I'm talking today with Avi Kahan about mediation and divorce and what divorce actually means. And Avi, if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you do, how can they do that?
So my company, it's a non-for-profit. It has a Hebrew name. It's Vad Hadin Vahora, which the link is Hadin, Hadin, which means judgment, hadin.org, or vadhadinvahora.com, or they could email me at rabbikahan@hadin.org, rabbikahan@hadin.org. And this is basically the same philosophy I share with different words, just over and over and over.
Well, since you've just given your contact information and referred to you're a rabbi as well?
When I work as an arbitrator, I title myself as a rabbi.
Yeah. So what are the halakhic considerations in divorce for Jewish families? How do you incorporate those principles into the mediation process?
So it's forced a little bit upon Jews because we have something called a get, which is a religious divorce, a religious document that a man has to give, and a man has to give it because he wants to, not because he needs to. And to understand the difference between need and want in English is what you need, you don't want, and what you want, you don't need, right? And you have to convince a man to want to give a get, which is, in my perception, beautiful if it could happen. But a lot of men use that as an opportunity to abuse their spouse and hold back the get. And when you use that to abuse, it colors the whole conversation. So the conversations sometimes start like, well, he's not giving me the get, so I'm not giving him the kids. Or, well, I'm not going to give her the get if she wants too much child support. So the conversation is always circulating this underlying tension of halacha. And what does halacha say I deserve? Halacha also has opinion about child support, custody, visitation. It doesn't really have an opinion. It has a perspective, I would say. Also, what's best interest of child is the terminology, and the legal terminology is also best interest of child, but I don't think it means the same thing, right? Because I don't really understand what best interest of child means. It sounds like prophecy to me. Like who knows what's best for children? I have 4 children. I don't know what's good for them. Like, I pray that I figured it out. So I don't think that's what the legal or the halacha law meant when they said it. I think we're misunderstanding it, what best interest means. But there is a perception that halacha wrote about historically, started 1500 years ago from the Talmud. It wrote extensively. There's tractates just about divorce. I would say the majority of topics in Talmud is about divorce, marriage, relationships, prenups, postnups, death, surrounding inheritance, right? Surrounding these topics. These are topics that people have never clarified since the beginning of humanity, right? And that's why there's so much war about inheritance, about land, about custody. So halacha has a perception, and what I try to do is integrate that perception, not as forcing people, because I'm mediating most of the time, but by sharing them, saying, hey, if you want to know the values, Jewish value, this is what I'm sharing with you, is what I believe a Jewish value. And I share my spiel that I just told you.
So, given that you're obviously really concerned about children going through divorce, what strategies do you recommend for divorcing parents to minimize the emotional and psychological impact on them? And imagine that the listener is one person of the couple, not both, right? Because oftentimes people are like, well, I would do that, but I can't because my spouse, blah, 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 blah. So if you could just sort of focus your comments on somebody who's listening and worries whether or not his or her spouse would actually
Make it easier.
cooperate.
Pick the husband or the wife. Make it a little easier for you.
Sure. Imagine the wife is listening and she just thinks the husband is just never going to agree because whatever.
So what I try to share with her, and I don't do it in 3 seconds, but what I try to share with her is 2 things, very important things, which shift, I think, a mindset. A, know that your husband doesn't want to get divorced. The reason why you're getting divorced is because you needed to. That means 99% of the divorces are initiated by women. Doesn't mean that the woman created the environment of the divorce, but she's the one who leaves usually. She's the one who can't stand a difficult environment. Men could live in difficult environments for years. A man, and if a lady creates a difficult environment, a man is going to stay there. He'd rather not get divorced, but women get divorced when they need to, not when they want to. If you ask any lady if she wanted to get divorced, she'll tell you, no, I needed to, right? I didn't have a choice. Men should not get divorced because they need to. If they need to get divorced, then they act out horrific, right? It means if they decide, okay, she's leaving me, I don't have a choice, I need to get divorced, they act out. The wife's job is to get her husband to want to get divorced. And that doesn't mean by making his life more miserable, because then you're making him more need to get divorced. So people think, oh, I'm gonna be more nasty, and then he's gonna act. No. Then he's gonna need to get divorced more. No. Get him to want to get divorced. And the therapy for a man to want to get divorced is to not need to get divorced, which means figuring out how he got into this situation, forgiving himself that he got into this situation, forgiving his spouse that he got into this situation, and building, now that I'm in this situation, I want to be here. If a lady could get her husband to want to get divorced, she will have the most beautiful, semi-romantic divorce that she could get. The men who acted out and wanting to get divorced, and there's a healing therapeutic process to get there, a deep psychological shift. Because like I said, what you need, you don't want, or what you want, you don't need. And most people do stuff because they need to. We breathe because we need to. We eat breakfast because we need to, not because we want to, right? I didn't have coffee because I wanted. I didn't have a choice. I drink coffee. I needed to. Wanting is very deep. And when you need something you don't want to, you have to get the husband to not need to get divorced and to want to. And a lady who could get her husband to that level, and it's crazy healing and therapy that needs to go there, shouldn't take a long time. It should never take more than a month, 2 months. But a lady who could get her husband to that place will have the most beautiful divorce that you could imagine. The most child support, the most money, alimony, and everything. It will be a romantic divorce when the husband wants to. But the process is hell. There's forgiveness. There's empathy. There's closure. It's what divorce is supposed to be. It's what the ceremony is wanted. It's to want to get divorced is a miracle if it could happen. I can tell you most men don't want to get divorced. They need to, and most divorces are happening because of need, not because of want.
Well, Avi Kavan, this has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.